and turn aspiration into action, we need to address the diverse nature of the climate change challenge among developing countries. And we need to understand better the specific needs of developing countries, whether in the area of climate finance, technology, or capacity building, and tailor the support in accordance with their national mitigation and adaptation goals. We have a lot of very important official documents. We have the NDCs, national adaptation plans, technology needs assessment. We have very large amounts of information coming from developing countries. But what is really need now to pivot the implementation is the adequate funding, and have the adequate funding flowing in the right direction on the basis of their specific domestic identified priorities by developing countries. As you know, the Secretariat is always ready to support in this effort, in particular on the mandate we have received from parties to assist developing countries in their assessment of their needs, financial needs, and turn them into potential investment opportunities. So we are doing that. The project is running very well. We have been collaborating with more than 100 countries all over the world, Asia, Africa, Caribbean, and Latin America. So this is continuing, and we are receiving some support to expand this work, but of course we will always welcome more support so we can do more in support in developing countries. And then in conclusion, really, as we see that finance and adaptation finance are growing in the importance in terms of satisfying the needs of developing countries, we will again scale up our efforts to respond more on this. And at the end, this is a two-way effort. We have to have the communication coming from developing countries, identification of these needs, but at the same time, we know that developed countries, they must scale up their efforts in delivering climate finance to developing countries. And if all this happens in a timely manner, supporting the specific needs, then we can have the real implementation moving forward. So it's really an opportunity to come together, collaborate, learn from each other, and really looking forward to the discussion with these very distinguished speakers and honorable guests. Thank you very much, Amal.
Thank you, Daniele. And so now I think probably someone who needs no introduction, Her Excellency Yasmina Fuad, of the Minister of Environment of Egypt, our host here at COP27. Please, Minister.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Moving from the youth room on the thematic day on the roundtable of adaptation and loss and damage, and coming here to discuss the climate finance needs of developing countries, I think they are not attached from each other. It's very important to set three important highlights for this session as part of my opening remarks. Number one is that around 100 countries that went through the process of their needs vis-a-vis the Secretariat support, but also that was further identified through the NDCs that were submitted, or the updated NDCs with their both pillars of mitigation and adaptation. What is really important right now is that this is a COP for implementation, is to get all this kind of information and documents and see how best to implement. But important topic here is that as we are all facing climate crisis, we need to be very smart in thinking of the just transition. The just transition that could be done and speed up the process for our fight against climate change. Throughout the COP presidency, throughout the days that we have planned for, they were planned for the developing countries when we're talking about the energy day, the water day, the agriculture and food system, the use, the science, the biodiversity, the solutions. So, and even the decarbonization that's taking place tomorrow. We're trying to hit on things that are very much important and serves the needs of our communities that we are serving. Secondly, the finance issue and how the funds are acting towards meeting those needs, because that's very important also to think of the financial mechanisms that were created by the parties to the convention, and if those mechanisms are fulfilling the needs that are there within the same process that have created those needs or not. Thirdly, how much of that is going to adaptation and loss and damage as being part of the puzzle of fulfilling the commitments of COP26? Because part of the COP27 presidency is to follow up on the commitments that were taken in Glasgow on doubling adaptation finance and see how further that could be done. If we can structure the discussion today on those 3 points, I think the result would be very useful for the COP presidency to take that over together with the Secretariat up to the next level of the high-level segment. And definitely I would like to greet my colleagues, fellow ministers, and Minister Amina for being there on the panel, and the Secretariat for all their support. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. So I think we have clearly an important agenda here as we look at and learn from the experiences of countries as they've been looking at their climate finance needs, and also the challenges and ways of overcoming the challenges in terms of access to finance and mobilization of finance, and also very importantly how to increase finance for adaptation. We had loss and damage, just transition, an important part of this agenda, as well as, of course, implementation and moving to implementation as this COP signals. So I'm now delighted to have 3 excellent panelists. The Honourable Minister Sean Edwards, who is Minister for Education, Sustainable Development, Innovation, Science, Technology and Vocational Training of St. Lucia. And Her Excellency Ms. Nino Tandilashvili, Deputy Minister of Environment, Protection and Agriculture of Georgia, and Her Excellency Minister Aminath Shauna, Minister of Environment, Climate Change and Technology, the Republic of Maldives. So first, turning to you, Honourable Minister Edwards, can you tell us a bit about the experience within St. Lucia? I know you've also been leading and convened the OECS countries on this important topic. It'd be great to hear more from you, some of the issues that have emerged, and in particular, I'm sure we'd love to hear more about the issue of adaptation, loss and damage, and I know you've also looked at the issue of insurance.
Thank you very much, and thanks for having me on the panel today. I must make the confession that it has only been 4 hours since I landed in Egypt after having left St. Lucia since on Tuesday. So if I come across as being a bit rusty, please forgive me. I must say that the topic for discussion is apt and very necessary for St. Lucia and other small island developing states of the Caribbean and OASIS as a whole. When I left St. Lucia on Tuesday, I was leaving behind a trail of destruction because a weather system had visited us, and in the space of roughly 3 to 4 hours, it had dumped approximately 6 inches of rain, and it left behind a trail of destruction. Homes were damaged, vehicles were floating in the streets like paper, schools were impacted, and the initial assessment we were estimating was somewhere in the region of $6 to $8 million. And all of this happened within the space of approximately 3 hours. I say this to make the point that these are weather systems that visit us in St. Lucia and the Caribbean with a degree of frequency that we had not seen before. And every time they come, they leave us in tatters. And we have to find the resources, in-house or externally, to be able to build back, to reconstruct. And we are doing so against a backdrop where Every year at COP and other international fora, we are being told that hundreds of millions of dollars are being made available for different mechanisms to be accessed by small island developing states. But we never get to tap into those monies because the process is ever so bureaucratic. But we can't just rely on the pledges and the promises that are made to us. We have to pick up the pieces and we have to continue to soldier on. We will not roll over and die. We understand that in the whole climate change discourse globally, we have a role to play. And our smallness of size in terms of demographics and even landmass should never be an impediment to prevent us from making our contribution. But we are saying that when you look at what countries like St. Lucia contribute to the climate change phenomenon, it is negligible, minuscule. And we are the ones every day, every month, at the receiving end of the impacts of climate change. People lose their lives every year, property is damaged every year, your road infrastructure is damaged, your crops are decimated. And when you seek help and you put out that cry for assistance to the international community, as I would have intimated earlier, the processes are so bureaucratic that sometimes you really cannot wait. And whilst you are picking up the pieces from one weather event, even before you are through with your mopping up operations, there's another at your doorstep. I can state categorically that for the average small island state of the Caribbean, the debt stock that we have to shoulder as government officials on a daily basis, approximately 80% of that money is being used to deal with the impact of climate change. And I'm saying here today that it is unconscionable. When you look at the contribution or what we emit by way of greenhouse gases, yet we are the ones who have to suffer. And every year, at every forum, at COP, at UNEP, whether it is the Global Conference on Oceans, you hear the pronouncements being made time and again that there are monies being pledged for small island developing states. But it never reaches our treasury. And when proposals are written and submitted to the international financial agencies for support, the sheer bureaucracy, there is always an inadequacy in the proposal that you submit. And when your proposal finally makes sense, then somebody calls you into a meeting to tell you that they cannot differentiate between development financing and climate financing. And these are some of the frustrations that we have to put with on a daily basis. I must tell you from a personal standpoint that I was very apprehensive about coming to COP this time around. But I understand that this is not about me and my personal sentiments. I understand that if I do not leave St. Lucia and take 3 and 4 flights to be in Cairo, I would not be doing justice to my people. And by staying home, it would be a gross dereliction of duty, not giving voice to the average fisherman and farmer who cannot tell his story to the international community, where the powers that be can have a better appreciation of what he goes through. So today I am here again on behalf of the government and people of St. Lucia, and by extension, the Caribbean and AOSIS, to say to everybody at COP, let us once and for all begin to walk the talk in all the different meeting rooms where meetings are convened. And I must say I was a bit happy to hear the minister from Egypt say that this year has to be a year of implementation. And I can go on and on, but I know my time is limited. But St. Lucia, as I said, we will not roll over and die. We understand that we have a part to play, both as a small island developing nation, and even when we come together in a grouping of CARICOM and AOSIS. We have undertaken at the national level to honor our obligations in keeping with the UNFCCC conventions and the Paris Agreement. We have adopted our national adaptation plan as required by UNFCCC, where we are looking to reduce, as negligible as it is, by 7%, we're looking to realize a reduction in greenhouse gas emission. Our national adaptation plan defines 8 priority areas that we must focus on as a small island. And those thematic areas would include water, fisheries, agriculture, our reliance on marine and terrestrial ecosystems, infrastructure, education, health, and very importantly, tourism. Tourism is the mainstay of our national economy. It is the most significant contributor to GDP. But tourism is a very vulnerable industry. It takes one hurricane, one tropical storm, one cyclone, one weather system to basically decimate your tourism product, and it will take you a while to recover by way of hotel reconstruction and so many other things. So there couldn't have been a better time to put this particular topic on the table. We need to find a workable mechanism to cause the quantums that are being pledged year after year to small island states to reach us. Because when we do not tap into the promised grant funding, we are left with no choice but to borrow. And when we borrow, we are faced with a national debt stock that literally ties the government's hands, and you are not able to provide basic amenities and basic services to the populace. So I'm hoping that we can have a very rich discussion here today, and as a collective, we can give greater expression to the plight of small island developing states. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Honour. And well, I'd love to come back to maybe ask more about, what these sort of innovative financial solutions, what can be done to really move to implementation in particular. Before that, though, I'm delighted to ask Her Excellency Nino Tandilashvili, the Deputy Minister of Environmental Protection and Agriculture of Georgia, if you could tell us some of the challenges you're seeing around access to finance and how you are seeing this project, the needs-based finance project, also helping address some of those.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, Excellencies. It is my pleasure to be here today. And of course, I would like to thank UNFCCC Secretariat for inviting us and me personally in this event, because to speak about on behalf of our region, which is South Caucasus region and Central Asian region, is very important, because here we have developing countries which have quite a lot of challenges when we are speaking about climate change, because of the fact that this region is highly vulnerable towards the impacts of climate change. And vulnerability is increasing yearly because the glaciers are melting. Our population live in the areas which are under the risks of the climate change. Water scarcity in our region poses a significant challenges to the food security and the development of agricultural sector as such. This topic and the topic of finance and the adaptation needs are crucial and important for our region. And when we're talking about the needs-based finance projects, of course, this is an opportunity for the countries in our region to collectively access and increase the access to the funding that could allow us, of course, to address regional climate change mitigation and adaptation needs and priorities. And while we are discussing the priorities, sometimes it's also important to highlight that more finances are needed for the adaptation programs, because as I already mentioned, this is the region which is very vulnerable towards the climate change. So all the countries are facing yearly the disasters, and we need to adapt ourselves to the climate change, which becomes more and more visible in our everyday life. What is also important when we are talking about the priorities is, of course, access to technologies and solutions, technology solutions that have to be proved already as effective and in the other parts of the world, and of course this needs to be shared in the region. In the other hand, also in terms of needs and capacity development, Of course, it's also important to understand the importance of capacity building as such, because often at the local level, the capacities of the local institutions are very limited in accessing international finances. And here we also, the region as such, needs more capacity development in identifying priorities, needs, and then, of course, ensuring all these into concrete projects that could allow us to further adapt ourselves again to the current challenges of the climate change. As a last words, I would like to say that needs-based finance approach, we hope that our countries will be able to identify key strategic areas and actions to ensure climate finance is effectively mobilized, accessed, utilized, and scaled up to contribute to the achievements of the intended mitigation and adaptation goals, and also the low emission development in our regions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So, Minister Shauna, of course, we have heard a lot about the leadership of the Maldives on this agenda, and I think you yourself have been very closely involved working with your president on this agenda, but also working across the region on these issues. So please could you tell us some more about how you're seeing this key challenge of accessing finance, but also some of the ways of addressing that, as well as what you're seeing with your colleagues across the region.
Thank you for the invitation and support that the Secretariat has provided to the Maldives and to Indian Ocean Islands in the project that we are currently working on. If I may first respond to the question regarding the challenges in terms of accessing finance, and then I'll go back to what we are doing in the Indian Ocean with regards to this project as well. We all know that the available finance particularly for vulnerable countries and small islands is nearly not enough. And we know that now we require trillions to be able to adapt in time to the changes that is exacerbated even while we're speaking as well. We know that SIDS are on the front lines, and the finance that does flow, adaptation is a very small amount of finance that is available as well. So the Maldives with other small island nations have been actively advocating for a sustainable solution where finance is predictable and available and accessible to countries as well. And one of the things that we've been really working on, particularly in making it more accessible, is contributing to this process. And like you said, it's even difficult to be here as well, because it is extremely challenging with regards to the fiscal situations in our countries as well. But regardless, we want to be here, we want to be part of this process, we want to continue to advocate on behalf of the people of the Maldives, people of St. Lucia, and all small island nations, including the vulnerable countries as well. One of the things that we have been really working is advocating to make the process for accessing funds simplified and harmonized procedure to make it more efficient for countries like ours. I'll give you an example of the Maldives' experience in the projects that we have accessed from the GCF as well. It has taken us an average 4 to 5 years to access these funds, while every year we have a rainy season, every year we have our islands flooded, every single island in the Maldives is eroding, every single island in the Maldives has run out of fresh water. I, as a minister, we can't be doing this every year. And the urgency and the pace of finance and the time it takes for us to access this finance and the amount of work that we have to do to prove that this is actually because of climate change is absurd. the scale of the impacts and what is available and the process it takes is just amazing. So I want to highlight that. And a lot of the times, adaptation finance and adaptation projects are not seen as bankable projects. So when we talk about, there's a lot of discussions about blended finance and private sector finance into adaptation as well. But this is a humongous task for us to be able to prove that this is actually a bankable project. So these things needs to be taken into consideration when we're talking about new goals for finance, when we're talking about how we can discuss on reforming the financial structure that exists as well. We are also talking about not just quantity, but quality of the finance that is available needs to be addressed as well. A lot of the times, the limited amount of finance that is available, a big chunk of that finance goes into consultants, it goes into administrative costs, it does not really go into projects that directly benefit the people in these island communities. So I don't understand why these things cannot be simplified, this cannot be addressed in a way where the recipient countries get the maximum benefit out of these the limited available finance as well. And I'm not going to just talk about the bad things, I will also reflect on the good things as well that is happening in our country and in the region as well. In this regard, we have been working on this project to bring together all the island nations in the Indian Ocean. This year, we held a meeting with all the island nations in the Indian Ocean, including the finance organizations as well represented. And in this, we were able to identify several areas of cooperation, including countries who have similar adaptation requirements, countries who are undergoing similar challenges in terms of adaptation. It was a very good setting for us to be together with countries as well as the implementing agencies as well as the donor funding agencies as well to be able to share it. In this, we were also able to come up with these strategies on how we can leverage and increase finance for the requirements in this region. And we plan to organize a forum where national governments are able to meet with donors as well as investors to be able to have a constructive and an effective discussion on increasing our adaptation and climate finance. And once again, I would like to thank the Secretariat for the support that Secretariat has provided in bringing together these regional island nations to have a discussion that is more focused based on our experience, based on our needs, and based on how we can leverage finance to flow more quickly than that is through the existing systems.
Thank you, Your Excellency. I may actually, if you may, ask you a follow-up question, and then I'll come back this way with one more question for each of you. So you talked about the collaboration around this project with your Indian Ocean islands. Could you expand maybe a little bit what you think, what kind of regional cooperation can really help access climate finance? And are there any specific areas that you're looking to move forward with now in implementation?
Thank you for asking the question. There are, like I said before, the Indian island nations, we do have a lot of commonalities as well when it comes to areas that we are affected by climate change. For instance, building resilience on coral reefs and marine environments is an area that was discussed and agreed on further collaboration to increase our adaptive capacity. Another area that was discussed was food security. For instance, the Maldives is I think most people would know the Maldives as a holiday destination, but we are also a very large fishing nation as well. And we have a vast ocean that we depend so much on for our income and jobs as well. With the impacts of climate change and with the impact it's having on the coral reefs, it also affects our food security because it affects the bait fisheries, it affects the productivity of the marine environment. So that was discussed as well. The third area that was discussed was establishment of early warning systems in the island communities, because these are really critical for us to be able to predict whether in time where we can hopefully minimize the damage and loss of lives and other issues that could be resulting because of severe weather. So these were three areas of collaboration that was discussed in our meetings with the island communities and nations in the Indian Ocean.
Thank you. Yeah, really, really interesting. And I think coming back to you, Honourable Minister, I mean, you also have strong collaboration within the OECS, and I'm just wondering how are you seeing this sort of joint work moving forward, particularly around sort of more innovative ways of accessing finance?
Yes, thank you very much for the question. I would have alluded to the fact that we are a very small island state, 238 square miles, a population of 180,000 people, what you would get at any train station in America or a more developed country on any given afternoon. But smallness of size, as I've said, is not a deterrent in terms of what we can do. But we also appreciate the fact that there can be limitations with small island developing states. And that is why at every opportunity, we try to collaborate on a wider Caribbean level for the CARICOM. And even within CARICOM or the Caribbean space, we have another setup known as the OECS, Organization of Eastern Caribbean States. And together we have been trying to develop a climate finance access and mobilization strategy. And what this strategy seeks to do is that it causes us to harmonize our efforts in pursuing climate finances. And it also allows us to bring our expertise together and to recognize and appreciate the economies of scale that we can leverage in our quest to access climate finance to treat with the issues that we have to put up with on a weekly, on a monthly basis. So there is need for collaboration. We have recognized that, and we are trying our utmost to ensure that we approach this on a joint basis. We're also members of EOSIS, which is the global body that looks after the interests of small island states. And sometimes we go at it on a hemispheric basis through collaboration with Eastern Caribbean and Latin American states. So any opportunity, any door that is open for us to go after climate financing, we will look to explore. And we're not looking to explore because we believe that there is money that you can just pick up and take away, but climate change poses an existential threat to us. We can, in the space of a few hours, watch our entire GDP being destroyed. And we do not have too many options that we can turn to in terms of reconstruction and looking to pick ourselves up and to rebuild our economy. So the more monies that are made available and the easier it would be to access, particularly for adaptation, the better it will be for us. Because as I said, we just continue to borrow and borrow and borrow, and that level of borrowing is not sustainable. And it has gotten to a point where the debt to GDP ratio is not favorable, and even the traditional financial institutions that you would have borrowed from, they are now beginning to frown on you because you come across as not being capable of managing your debt. And I will repeat and reiterate the point that we are not the main culprits when it comes to the emission of greenhouse gases that result in climate change and all the evils that come with climate change. But on a daily basis, we have to put up, irrespective of our citizens, individual stations in life, they are the ones who have to put up with this on a daily basis. And all we are seeking to do at meetings and at a forum like COP is to tell the more developed countries, tell COP and tell the global community to please hear our cries and give us what we believe we justly deserve. Not because you owe it to us, but the situation that has been created is one that is real, and we are at the receiving end.
Thank you, and I think probably everyone here will have heard Prime Minister Motley's opening in the high-level session, which I think was making very, very similar points about the urgency, in particular the issue around debt sustainability being needing to be addressed. So I'll come back to you, Deputy Minister. So how are you seeing it within your region, and what do you see that this project in particular may do to help promote more of a regional response to this issue of accessing finance?
Thank you very much. Just to highlight, I personally believe that the cooperation and collaboration among the countries of our region is becoming more and more crucial and important. By giving the example, for instance, in between 2013 2018, the finances, international climate finance for the region as such was around 9.1 billion US dollar. But from this amount of money, only 2% has been used for the regional programs and projects. So this highlights the importance to strengthen the regional cooperation because, as I already mentioned, our region and the countries, we face exactly the same problems. This relates to agricultural sector, this is related to energy, and this is related to all the sectors that is actually affected by the impacts of the climate change. Therefore, strengthening the regional cooperation is one of the priorities for us. Identifying the regional needs and then putting these regional needs in the concrete regional projects have a crucial importance. By giving the example, I can give you one example of the regional project that I can say is very successful, and this comes from the GCF funding, for instance, and this is related to the modernization of the transport sector, because again, all the countries of our region face the same challenges in the transport sector. So we've identified the importance of the needs that we had in the transport sector, and then, of course, this allowed us to closely collaborate with each other in this area. And of course, again, technology development. This is also one of the important and crucial aspects. And this could be also done throughout the regional cooperation programs and projects. And one of the most, and the last important topic, there has been emphasis from my colleague about the importance of the early warning systems, because this actually allows us to prevent the damage, and this allows us to limit the damage to the lives of the people, to the lands, and to all important aspects. And through the support of the Green Climate Fund, Georgia has started an important project that actually allows us to develop early warning systems throughout the country. And of course, this will allow us to have proper weather forecasting and to reduce the risks that is coming from disasters. But of course, regional cooperation is becoming more and more important in this context as well. So we started a close collaboration with our neighbors to exchange hydrometeorological and meteorological data, because this could be beneficial for all the countries in the region, and this can be also considered as one of the topics where regions like us can closely cooperate and collaborate with each other and allow themselves to access to the finances more efficiently that is available in the international funds already. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So maybe I'm just going to have one more question to the panel, hopefully not too provocative, but there's been a lot of talk here, obviously, from the high-level opening, and Minister Fouad herself mentioned this, that the discussion here and the lessons being learnt can also importantly help influence the discussions here around loss and damage. So a question, and maybe starting with you, Minister Schauner, because I know you've probably thought about this quite a bit, but do you think the international architecture is fit for purpose when looking at this issue of loss and damage?
The simple answer to that is no. And I think that's why it's become such a hot topic of debate today. And also the reason why we are talking about loss and damage today is because we have failed, one, on mitigation, and we have failed, two, on financing adaptation as well. The longer we wait on reaching an agreement, the costlier it will be on our ability to be able to address loss and damage as well. I also want to say that loss and damage is a complicated issue. And I think a lot when we talk about loss and damage, we're talking about the rapid impact of climate change, also the slow onset impacts of climate change. For the Maldives is more on the slow onset impacts of climate change. What happens to a country when, like the Maldives, when the reef system is completely bleached and every year becomes a warm year, not given enough time for the coral reefs to recover and adapt to the changes in a normal setting as well. That kills our bait fisheries. That kills our fisheries industry. That prevents our fishermen to be able to go out there and fish. That kills our tourism industry as well. So the coral reef is our source of food, our source of income, and our source of protection as well. So loss and damage, we're talking about not just one storm beating up and completely flattening countries. We're also talking about the slow onset impacts of climate change. That affects the entire socio-economic stability of a country as well. That affects the social protection systems of a country as well. I'll give you one example of, for instance, from the Maldives, when the Asian tsunami, we were affected and a couple of islands had to be relocated. I know that that's not climate change related, but the island communities that had to be relocated, even until today, years later, they're not able to fully reintegrate into the host island. This gives us just the tip of the iceberg of how complicated climate change can be for island communities, particularly that would face issues of displacement, economic issues, and social protection issues as well. What happens with loss and damage also is when we are on year by year, on an annual basis, when we have to reallocate our already limited finance in our budgets for disaster relief, to provide safe water, to provide coastal protection, that diverts our fiscal space that we have to spend on education, on healthcare, and countries like ours, we're not just battling with climate change. We also have issues where we need to consolidate democracy and institution building in our country. We also have issues of Islamic radicalization as well. So we want to be able to spend that money not on disaster relief, not on building shore protection every year that gets destroyed the next year because the storm is far more severe than the year before. So predictable finance for loss and damage is not just about humanitarian relief. It's not just about the establishment of a fund. It is about flow of predictable finance for countries like ours that will help us rebuild our countries, that will help us to continue a path of stability and democratization as well.
Minister, would you like to also respond to this question?
I couldn't agree more with Shauna on this particular issue. When you look at loss and damage, for me, it is something that is stackable because, as I would have intimated earlier, before you are able to deal with one disaster, there's another on your doorstep. And you find yourself in this cycle where you never fully recovered, but there's so many other demands on the national front that you have to deal with. And the little that you have by way of national income, it is always a tough decision in terms of what is allocated to healthcare. During the pandemic, I can tell you in St. Lucia, we had a particular situation where, we never saw COVID impacting our education system the way it did. And I'm sure no small island state throughout the world was spared. Then we had to make the rapid transition from face-to-face instruction to online learning. But you cannot have an effective online learning platform if the students do not have devices. So whereas you want to continue with your sea defenses and you want to deal with matters of adaptation, you also have 26,000 school children who do not have devices in sufficient amounts to allow education to continue. So it is really a struggle, and as I would have said, you cannot look at dealing with climate change in isolation of your other national development imperatives. It poses an existential threat. We are here today, and we can quickly vanish tomorrow. So the faster we can put in place mechanisms that would make access to financing less bureaucratic, I think the better it will be for small island states on a number of fronts.
Thank you. So I'm going to come to you, Deputy Minister, but also I'm going to be soon turning to the audience. I know there's a lot of senior government representatives here and also the Green Climate Fund. Please get ready to ask your questions. I assume we have microphones that will be handed round. So maybe the microphones, if you want to raise your hand, we can start to bring the microphone to you. But Deputy Minister, if you'd like to respond to this last question.
Thank you very much. I could not add more what has been said from my colleagues. Of course, it is important to agree on the mechanism of the loss and damage because we also, despite all the issues that has been listed from my colleagues, that the money that is actually reallocated from the state budget in case of the natural disasters to compensate to farmers, those who urgently need the support from the state, we also have to implement our nationally determined contribution documents, right? So in order to make them implementable, there is a huge need for from the support of the state budget, as well as, of course, from the private sector, but the contributions from the state itself. So there we also need additional finances, and therefore this highlights why it is so important to have a mechanism that is related to loss and damage so that the countries can have the possibilities to continue their development in a way that is planned by themselves, and also to continue the implementation of their nationally determined contribution documents. Because without that, we cannot reach the goals that we promised, of course, to ourselves nationally, but internationally as well, the commitments that we took together. So that's also very important. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think I know a couple of requests from the floor. I'm not sure if you have the microphone. Who has the microphone at the moment? But do we have Madam Fonofan Wutavong from the Deputy Minister of Planning and Investment at Lao People's Democratic Republic? Yes, if we could have the microphone here, please.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for giving an opportunity. So, dear Excellencies, Ministers of Environment, Climate Change and Sustainable from Egypt, St. Lucia, Maldives and Pakistan, and dear Mr. Daniel Violiti from UN FCC Secretariat. Dear moderator, I am Phonvan Uttawong, Deputy Minister of Planning and Investment of Lao PDR. It is my great honor to be here and joining this very important meeting, especially the COP27 as a deputy head of the delegation and under the leadership of Her Excellency Madame Bunkam Volachit and the Minister of Environment and Natural Resources of Lao PDR. So thank you very much. On behalf of the delegation and also on this special meeting, I would like to thank you, the Secretariat, for organizing this very important event and giving Lao PDR to provide these, remarks on this important event. I would also like to thank you for providing me and as a deputy head of delegation to share a few words on what we have trying to do to increase, the climate financing flows in our countries and the challenges that we are facing. Your comment on our experience and would be most welcome. And you may be aware that Lao PDR is strongly committed to climate action, and of course this means that adaptation plan is our priority for the now and also in the future. And as other countries, high expose of Lao PDR, extreme weather means adaptation to climate change is a top priority for our country. And Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, all countries need to do their part on mitigation and including Lao PDR with a small emitter and of course own contribution account. On climate mitigation, Lao PDR has ambitious NDC submission updated in 2021 to include the target for net zero emission by 2030, 2050, of course. And we are committed to carbon neutrality for long-term sustainable development. And Lao PDR updated NDC also includes the target by 2050, 2030, and also a short-term horizon include reducing green gas emission by 60% and increase forest cover to 70% of total land area, and also promoting increased use of renewable and clean energy through a 30% of share of the electronic vehicles and 10% of biofuel. Climate adaptation and mitigation are strongly integrated in Lao PDR national planning, and we have a green growth strategy to 2030 guides our sustainable development planning and has elaborated in the current 9 National Socio-Economic Development Plan, which has a dedicated pillar on the climate change and environmental protection. One of our biggest challenges is financial, as mentioned by Excellencies. We lack the resources for rapid and accelerated action to fulfill our climate agenda. Like many other countries, Lao PDR has financial difficulties, which is the challenging investment is not only the action, climate action, but also human capital development. And we have limited physical space, and the private sector need to contribute significantly more to the green growth agenda. And Lao PDR is expected to graduate from LDC countries status by 2026. And for sustainable graduation and for continued development progress, we need to urgently resolve these financial difficulties. Ministry of Planning and Investment, together with Lai ministries and with the support of UN Resident Coordinator and RCO office, and development partners, particularly international financial institutions, GGGI, and other OECD, and we have recently concluded the financing strategy for the achievement of our national plan. And it is based on the integrated national financing framework, which looks at all sources of finance for development. And this strategy has the dedicated chapter to increase fiscal space for climate change priority, tackle carbon finance, and realign private investment to climate resilient economic activities. I welcome this integrated approach and recommend other LDCs and countries to link their national plan, their climate priorities, and other development of an integrated national financing framework. As a small country with limited financing strategy, and despite our best intention, we will need everyone's support to achieve our global and national climate targets. Indeed, the commitment to $100 billion annual climate finance has not been reached. The Adaptation Gap report from the UN Environmental Programme released last week highlights that international adaptation finance flow to developing countries are 5 to 10 times below estimated needs. For this reason, LAOPDIA welcomed the high-level event and the opportunity to speak about the importance of climate finance for LDCs. To this event, as guest speakers, I would like to hear your thoughts about our experience, our ambition, and how we can best put on financing flows at the service of climate action. On behalf of LAOPDIA, I would like to warmly thank you this opportunity to intervene today, and I wish chairs, Mr. Minister, Vice Ministers, and distinguished guests a productive COP27. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Deputy Minister. So now we have His Excellency Deputy Minister of the Ministry of Finance of Somalia, please.
Well, thank you very much, the panel members, Honorable Minister Sean and Shuana. I was listening to your comments. It was very useful. Just one comment and one question from me. I'm Abdul Ghaffar Hange. I am representing Somalia. I'm the Deputy Finance Minister from Somalia. So Somalia, as you might know, is one of the hardest hit, most vulnerable countries impacted by the climate change in a form of increased frequent droughts, cyclones, and the shortage of water, and the outbreak of locusts and all that. We have been, a victim for the loss and damage, as you say, of the climate change in all aspects, whether it's a rapid or it's slow onset. That has impact on our economy. It had an impact on our agricultural sector. It had an impact on our political stability. It has reached to the level where it has created a conflict, because our society is constituted by mainly on the pastoral communities who basically has livestock, moves from one location to another location in search of pasture and all that. So the scarcity of water, the scarcity of the green pasture has actually been a source of conflict for a long time. And now, in accumulation of all these problems, has actually impacted the stability of our governance system, of our political stability and all that. So now when it comes to the climate finance, the access has become extremely complex. It's a challenge. It has not been simplified. So you, as a ministers who have been benefiting, who have, from this climate finance, what is it you can tell us? What can be a common approach that can, facilitate and, easy, simplify the process of climate finance for the countries like Somalia and the likes? And the second, how can we also achieve the transparency and accountability within the climate finance? Because we believe the donor countries, mainly Western developed countries, are still actually dictating who gets access to climate finance and all that. So how can we make it outside of the, how can we make it clean or from the political influence when it comes to climate finance? We are actually emitting the smallest when it comes to the carbon emissions, and yet again we are also facing the biggest negative impact of the climate change. So countries like Somalia. So finally, I also wanted to talk about the issue of we are in a process of debt relief. We are not allowed for concessional funding. So how can we get issues like funding for grants and etc. And in the end, I wanted to ask you also the private sector engagement in your respective countries. How was the appetite of the private sector when it comes to funding for the climate-related programs? Thank you very much.
Thank you. So I'm going to ask the panel to respond, but before doing that, I have a question here at the front. So I have one here at the front, another in the middle, another at the back. Please, say who you are, please, before you make your intervention.
So thank you, Your Excellencies, for this great conversation. And climate finance is a very significant topic. So my question, so let me represent the other side of the table, which is youth, let's say, and activists. So given that the high level representation of the panel. So given that we talk about climate finance, and this is a very critical topic in the recent years, especially since the Paris Agreement, I have two questions in brief. The first one is regarding financing climate activity itself. So given that all countries, including Egypt, and all the represented countries are trying to work on NDCs, so my question is climate finance the only obstacle to having clear NDCs and environment policies? Because, for instance, there are other environmental practices that, if hindered, might contribute as well. For instance, deforestation, or cutting trees, or coal mining, and so on. So, is financing, given the importance of it for sure, the only reason why NDCs are not clear in many countries, or the only reason why environmental policies are a bit behind? And the second question, also regarding climate finance, is what, in your opinion, what are the suggested international practices, let's say, to help in financing? For instance, carbon pricing is one of them. But is there other innovative suggestion for climate finance instead of depending only on polluting countries or let's say high income countries? What do you suggest for international practices to encourage and to increase climate finance for countries with low and middle income? Thank you.
Thank you. And so we have another person in the middle. Also, is there anyone here from the Green Climate Fund who would like to respond? Okay, we'll come to you then after we have two more questions, then we'll come to yourself. Thank you.
Thank you, moderator, honorable ministers, all delegates. I didn't have any questions because our voices are already expressed by both ministers from Maldives and St. Lucia that climate finance is almost once a blue moon type of things for all developing countries. I'm representing Nepal, And I want to recall the Dakar Declaration of Ministerial Declaration of Climate Change, where we need to produce collective and quantified goal on climate finance should be based on science and address the need of developing countries. But I don't know the people from UNFCCC and other fund here, but our voices are always unheard. As Minister Amina said that, it takes 4 years, 5 years to receive a single fund in single projects, and how we are discussing on climate finance. It's terrible things. So how we simplify the process of receiving climate finance for developing countries, how we develop our capacity to receive that funds on time, on need. These things need to be addressed in COP27. Otherwise, we are participating in COP every year and we are discussing, well, the pledging is not important things. Receiving is important thing. Implementation is important thing. So we need to address these things. And the country-specific need is very special. All countries, from cryosphere, from small island, from mountainous, from landlocked, all have different needs. So we need to develop the capacity of the institution to deliver this type of different, to address this type of difference in coming days. And the fund, what we need is underfundable. So how the climate finance will able to finance our financing need, and how we improve our domestic resources mobilization on climate. Because if we are waiting the global finance, we will suffer for more years. So we need to develop our internal capacity, as well as we need to develop our capacity to receive international funds. Thank you.
Thank you. So, this gentleman at the back.
Thank you. I'm the National Climate Finance Advisor for Mauritius. Let me first thank my fellow SIDS nations for raising very pertinent issues on climate financing. But what I heard is, I mean, we agree, all of us agree that the GCF has practically failed us. We have not received adequate amount of funding from the GCF at any point of time. And it's good that you are in the room to respond to that. So what we have noticed, and you also have highlighted, that it's too onerous a process to go through GCF. And even when we are having a national implementing entity, to get a national implementing entity to have a direct access. That's also not a very sorry. I think the GCF has some role to play in this. Anyway, thank you. So that process of getting an NIE approved is also not very easy. So you have to write probably 1,700 pages of documentation to prove that you are eligible enough to get funds. My question, and I would like my SIDS nations to stand by me if they feel so, is why this process cannot be done through the Ministry of Finances, specifically for the SIDS nations. And why does the SIDS nation have to again and again prove the vulnerability of the countries when every available documentation scientifically says that the SIDS nation is more vulnerable from most of the countries? That's one. Now, we also acknowledge that the GCF does not have that much amount of funding, and let us acknowledge that. At one end, the GCF does not have enough amount of funding and says that many projects from the SIDS nation specifically are too small for the GCF to strategically approve. On the other hand, donor sides like the World Banks or IMFs, they say that we are high or middle income countries and we are not eligible for concessional fundings. So we, as the small island states, we are falling between the gaps between the two. So is it not the right moment to ask for not a SIDS-specific window, but a SIDS-specific fund, which specifically caters to us on a grant-based funding, taking our specific vulnerabilities into account? Thank you.
Thank you. And so no pressure Green Climate Fund. Please take the mic.
Thank you very much, Excellencies, dear colleagues. My name is Alisher Mamadzhanov. I'm with the GCF Secretariat. I would like to, if possible, first say a few words about the NBF project, because we had a very good cooperation, have had very good cooperation with the UNFCCC Secretariat in the implementation of this project, including this year. As we participated in a number of regional trainings under the NBF project, and also contributed to drafts of the strategies, regional strategies, which are being drafted. And we can hope that this cooperation will continue also, especially when now the project will go into the third phase, basically coming up with resource mobilization, also strategies, investment plans. Here also we would like to underline the importance of liaising with our national designated authorities, NDAs, in countries, that these projects and this process can also inform preparation, for example, of country programs. Now coming to also questions and some of the feedback on GCF, I would like also to thank everyone for positive also feedback, and also for some concerns which were raised. We definitely listen to all countries, the developing countries, and continue to improve our processes. I would not go into details, but if you look into our documents and recent also information, our annual reports, we've been continuously reducing the period of time which is required both for the processing of funding proposals and readiness proposals. So this data is available. Also, in terms of our some of our targets in our investment framework is under our updated strategic plan until 2023. As you know, we have a 50% allocation floor for priority countries, which are LDC seats in African states. And actually, we have exceeded this floor, and now 66% of all our adaptation funding goes to those countries. Also, we're continuously striving to reach the balance between mitigation and adaptation, which now stands at 49 to 51. So we're very close in grant equivalent terms in balancing adaptation as mitigation, as is required by our also governing instrument. We also now are at the important juncture for GCF. This is next year will be final year now updated strategic plan, and we are also the board has launched already our second replenishment process, which we will culminate in the pledging conference in October next year. Also, a few words about the simplification. We, of course, understand and we listen to the challenges and difficulties that countries are experiencing. And this year, board has adopted a number of very important policies which will help to simplify and speed up the access to the funds. So just to very quickly mention a few. So first of all, in terms of accreditation, the fund has adopted an updated accreditation framework, which now includes a new mechanism which is called PSAA, so Project-Specific Assessment Approach. It means that entities which are not accredited with GCF can go for one-time project-specific assessment, and which will save them from going through entire normal, let's say, classic accreditation cycle. They would be able to do that on one project basis. And of course, priority, the board gives a priority to direct access entities in this process. Also, in terms of already procedure that we had, simplified approval process, the board has again updated this process. So now the countries would be able to receive funding up to 25 million GCF funding under this process. Before it was 10 million. In addition, there were some important simplifications. For example, you don't need a concept note now for sub-process. You can directly submit a funding proposal. Also, on the impact potential, you mentioned vulnerability issue and that the countries every time have to show climate rationale. So this year, again, the board adopted a very important update on this. So a policy on demonstrating impact potential for mitigation and adaptation projects, so which actually clarifies what is required, including in terms of data required to demonstrate impact potential, climate impact potential for projects. Again, on the adaptation, the board has approved a new guidance, and which includes our vision on adaptation, and on private sector, which was also mentioned by Excellency Minister from Somalia, is that the board has adopted a new strategy for private sector, which again has the main aim is to catalyze more private funding into countries. So as you can see, these are just a few. The board continuously is working to improve access, including speed and simplification. Now, again, just to finish that, of course, we've been maturing as a fund, but now we are reaching a phase of our full maturity. We have demonstrated that we can program a substantial amount of funds per year. And now, actually, with the last, our recent board, our portfolio in GCM funding allocated has reached 11.3 billion. And with co-financing, this is now more than 42 billion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So a lot of work underway. So I'm being told that I need to wrap up. So unless any of the ministers would like have a burning response they'd like to bring to any of the questions or comments made. No, well, hopefully the conversation no doubt will continue. So just to give a very brief wrap up from my side, I think what is very clear here at this COP of implementation is there's a real urgency to address these issues. There is countries, and particularly smaller countries and countries who are really on the front line of the climate crisis, suffering loss of GDP or conflict resulting through climate-related impacts. Really, there is an urgency to increase finance. And in particular that there are some specific needs. Every country has its own specific needs, particularly in terms of capacity building and how that can enable technology development, and in particular those measures related to adaptation and resiliency. But also there may be some valuable commonalities, particularly across regions or where there are geographical commonalities. And so in some cases, particularly we heard in the case of small island developing states, there can be some economies of scale around certain types of activity. For example, early warning systems. I think we heard also that similar in Georgia, the region of Georgia resides. Clearly, there is a need to look at how to simplify access to finance, to accelerate the access, but also, very importantly, the quality. I think that has come through very clearly, that the quality of climate finance is also important, not just the quantity, as well as the predictability of that. So a lot of common themes, a lot of urgent issues to address, and I think, as we heard also from the Minister Fouad earlier, many of these issues likely will be discussed and hopefully result in good decisions here at COP27. So thank you very much. Thank you to the Secretariat, and thank you particularly to our panelists and you, the audience. Thank you.